In this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about team culture where IEPs and legal processes are concerned. Specifically, we're going to focus on parent valuation and the practices that we need to have as educators. Developing a positive team culture. This is talking about the attitudes and beliefs that are valued by a team. Now, one of the articles that I gave you in this unit to read was Dubkowski. This was published in 2004. There were a lot of different ideas within that publication, and so I want you to just take a moment to think about what the things are that really influence culture and ultimately impact parent participation. In example 1 of the Dubkowski article on page 35 is really kind of interesting. All three of those examples are interesting actually, but if you take a moment to have read them through, you will understand that there's some very specific points brought out in all three of those examples. Those three examples are not inclusive of all issues that are impacting culture and parent participation, but there are some very specific things. Mary Smith, for example, in the first one, felt very isolated and teamed up against instead of with. Catherine Brown, in the second example, felt very probably devalued and disrespected, and there were barriers created there. And then in the third one, it's likely that Mrs. Jones felt unempowered. So those are some things that can be caused by the structure and the team culture that we present and that we foster. Okay, so hopefully you came up with a few of these on your own in having read the materials and the readings, but the things that I want to focus on are the elements influencing team culture, such as the environment, and this is specific to IEP type team meetings, attendance of those, preconceptions that a parent can have, language issues, cultural differences, parent knowledge, and valuation of parent input. And this is including a topic called predetermination. As far as the environment is concerned, I know that Dubkowski specifically pointed out a few things. I want to make sure that certain things are highlighted and maybe added to. The location is a really important piece. What turf, so to speak, are you going to put that parent on? Is it a neutral location? Is it one that's going to be intimidating? Are they in a position where it would be better served to have that IEP meeting off school grounds for some reason? And I'll give you some ideas of why that might happen later when we get to other topics. The space that's provided. You saw that in the first example that Dubkowski gave with Mary Smith, the space that was provided had the environmental elements that would kind of place her on one side of things and the rest of the team on other sides. Now, I know that when we talked about communication, most of you picked up the idea that you needed to look at the space around you and rearrange that, or use round tables or no barriers between you. Privacy is another one. I think it was in Catherine Brown's Catherine Brown's example, number 2, that they put them in a place where they could be overheard by other students. It was not private. She felt like she couldn't participate because of being overheard or feeling insecure. Also, to have a collaborative feel. This includes everyone. Now, the environment, specifically spatially, is not of concern here, but the environment that you create socially is of concern in this particular last bullet point. Think about what happens prior to an IEP meeting starting. Maybe there are certain members of the school-based team that are already there. You're maybe chit-chatting, you're talking about events, you're talking about other things that don't involve the parent. You could be, just by means of your behavior prior to the start of the meeting, isolating that parent. What you need to do is think about, even before the meeting starts, start to build that relationship, include them as a participating member of the people that are in that room already. Ask them about events that happened, talk to them about school things that they might have been involved in, the recent field trip, the things about their child, asking them about maybe their extracurricular activities their child does, um, or some neat things that happened at school that included them or their child. Don't exclude them and isolate them prior to the start of the meeting. Now, regarding attendance, there are a few different points I want to make. Time is one of them. Now, I could go into a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, and I won't. It's really important, though, to know that as a school based team, we are obligated by law to do what we can to be flexible for a parent. Having a meeting in the middle of the school day where they're having to take off work or it's difficult for them, we need to be careful about doing that. Now, that's not to say that we as educators always need to do things in the evenings, on the weekends, whatnot. But we need to have some flexibility and thought with that. It is not completely up to the parent to have that flexibility. The law states that it is a mutually agreed upon time and place. Now, that does need to be mutually agreed upon. Do your best to accommodate what the parent's needs are. Transportation can be another issue. I just had a course with a former special ed director that was telling me about a circumstance that he had where there was a school meeting that they had and the parent was very dedicated, didn't have a car, but took the bus normally. However, didn't have money for the bus that day. So walked with baby and stroller in very bad winter weather miles to get to this meeting. We don't always have parents that can do that. Could we find out the transportation needs of the parent or make sure that we're aware of certain things? That school could have easily provided bus fare, could have potentially sent someone to pick her up, could have relocated the meeting at a closer place and time. Think about transportation needs that parents have. And then the participation of others. Think about their want or need to bring other people with them. Think about how many people and whether or not the people that are attending on the school side are really necessary. Could it be intimidating to have as many people as you have if it's not essential that they be there? Preconceptions I kind of addressed in the text-based lecture that I gave, but just continue thinking about prior relationships or prior IEP experiences that the parent has had and the preconceptions that they could bring with them. The defensiveness, the willing or the lack of willingness to participate, all could be from prior experiences in which you need to trust build and not react to that personally and help that parent through that issue. Also, the parent's own previous school experiences may play a huge part in that, about how they feel about their ability to participate, how they feel about their child's abilities to improve, and their own needs. That can be a very big part of it, so just be aware. Language and cultural differences, I meshed these together on this slide. However, there's some very specific things that we need to think about. Technical jargon. When we speak at an IEP meeting, if we were using a lot of language and vocabulary that is specific to special education, specific to the field of education, we may be isolating that parent. We need to use lay terms without sounding that we are not giving the parent credit for their own knowledge, or that we are in some way offending them. But we need to make sure that our technical jargon is either used mildly or that it's well explained. Another issue that you need to consider is the use of interpreters. Now, the Low article that you have does an excellent job of really pointing out those issues. We can have interpreters, but they need to be trained interpreters. We need to not rely on friends and family of that person. However, in tight need, we might have to. if it's a commonly spoken language or a dialect of a commonly spoken language that's frequent in our community, there's no excuse. If it's somebody that moved in and speaks, a really rare form of um, of a language that's maybe European or African in descent, and so we may not have the availability. There are technological and phone-based interpretations that you can provide or can be provided through a school district. But, we need to make sure that they're educated as much as possible. By educated, what we mean is not intelligence, we mean about educational processes. Because how something can be interpreted without the knowledge and understanding of how we mean things in the educational field can come across very differently from an interpreter standpoint. So we need them trained in the knowledge of the language and the vocabulary that we use, so that it can be properly interpreted. We also need to avoid using a child as an interpreter. Not only can we not be sure of a child's accuracy, especially if it's not something very flattering to the child that's being discussed, but also for some parents it's a cultural issue. You're putting the child in a hierarchical trump over their parent, and that's not fair to put the parent in that position. The parent is relying on the child when trying to make educational decisions, and that's just not something we want to do to them. The levels of participation, we need to understand that in some cultures that it is not acceptable to question the authority of educators, especially in a formal venue. If we are putting, sometimes the Low article does this really well, talks about it and defines it really well. And sometimes the Spanish culture, as well as the Asian culture, is very much like this, in that if we don't discuss some of those things informally with them, they will not question the authority of educators in a formal meeting, such as an IEP meeting. That could diminish their participation. It may not always happen, but we need to be aware of the potential of it and try and circumvent that when possible. And then their anticipated roles. If they don't know what roles are expected of them as a parent and that they are expected to be a team member and part of the decision making, they may not come with that mentality to the meeting to be able to do that. We need to prepare them for that, and especially pre-plan for it in the sense that it might be a culture issue, and we need to do those processes informally prior to the meeting and then assist that parent during the meeting. Now, when talking about valuation of input and parent knowledge, first of all, the parent's role is really important. Not only do we need to relate that to the parent, but we need to relate it to the other team members. We need to make sure that as a team, it's understood that the parent is an equal member. That's a piece of the law, special ed law, that a parent be an equal team participant. It's not just a nice thing to do, it's something we have to do. And within that parent's role, we need to recognize, which I don't think we do enough in our educational processes, that the parent is an expert. The parent may not have expertise as far as a degree in special education or math expertise, but they have an expertise in their own child. They are an expert of their child. We are not. They have been with their child since birth and through all the different school placements and all of the different year after year, and struggles at home and struggles in community. We need to value them as an expert in their child and use their expertise to help us make decisions. We also need to have a supportive process, encourage them to participate. If we are sitting in a meeting and it is facilitated in a way in which we are giving information and we are not asking for input, and it's one-way information, we're not going to support them in being that equal team member. We need to facilitate in a team-based way. We need to solicit ideas, solicit input One way to do that is to make sure that parents get information prior to the IEP. Now, I'm going to talk about this more in the predetermination presentation, but a lot of schools make the habit of sending the IEP draft home to parents. That's risky, and I'll explain why it is more in the later presentation. But it's specifically risky in the fact that if you have an IEP that looks like the IEP that's already been done, parents are not motivated to participate. They think it's all said and done. They have no rationale for participating. If you do something like that, make sure that you designate it as a draft, that it is not complete. I would rather you send home the goals and objectives that the student has done, their progress, and let the parents formulate questions and concerns. Make sure they have a copy of the previous year's IEP. And we'll talk about the consequence of a draft later, and the uses and how you can do it correctly. But talk with them throughout the year. Make sure that this isn't the one-shot deal for them to participate, and that they have the opportunity to come up with questions and comments and think about that prior to coming to the meeting. Parent education is another big part of this. This is the project you're going to do for the unit, but we need to see what is our responsibility in educating parents in the special ed processes. I think we are very, as far as where the law is written, we are very responsible in making sure parents have an understanding of the process and that they're supported in that process. So then it's how do we go about best educating our parents about these processes? And that's what I'm going to have you work on during this project. And then making sure that they have resource tools, whether that's part of the parent education or not. Make sure that they have a copy of the IEP, make sure that they're informed, make sure that they have communication, that they understand, that they have resources, and they have advocates when needed.